Hi there, and welcome to my channel, the channel that I call Always Evolving, Always Work in Progress. We're a new channel, so we're kind of trying to kind of follow the yellow brick road and see where we land. It's also a channel where I foresee in the not too distant future, hopefully, where we can have conversations with one another, everyday people like you and me, not somebody that's published a book or somebody that teaches a particular course, just normal everyday people navigating through this rather challenging time as we go through this evolutionary process. So if this idea appeals to you, my contact information is right below this video. So click on it and give me a holler, and let's see if we can make that happen as well. Now today, what I want to talk about is part 2 of Unresolved Trauma. Did part 1 yesterday, and today we're doing part 2 of Unresolved Trauma. If you haven't listened to part 1, it would be good to listen to that first so that part 2 makes sense. But I will give just a quick review that when we talk about trauma, everybody has had trauma that's on this planet. You can't be here and not have it. Now, trauma isn't one size fits all, or it needs to be a particular dramatic type of situation. If you look at a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the least, you can have some traumas that have not been resolved. Maybe it only happened one time. And then you go up to 10, and that could be a very challenging trauma. It could also be something that happened once, but it could be something like maybe you were raped and as a teenager, or raped anyway, and that's become a trauma for you. The point with these traumas are that many of them are unresolved. They happen, and we kind of store them in the body. And then they get triggered by outer situations. And it can be very, very subtle triggering that we're not even aware of. And also what they do is they pretty much can be a reason why our life is moving in a particular direction. And again, they're unresolved. So, we're not realizing it. Oftentimes it can be anger issues, particularly they say for males, but females as well, but it's just the anger shows up in different ways. Bottom line is it is something that at this point in time, we really need to find out where our unresolved traumas are in order to move through this evolutionary process. And how we find this out is we start to, one, become aware of these subtle triggers, or maybe kind of looking at our life and wondering, why is it that this keeps happening, whatever that is. Or why do I always feel unsafe? That can be an unresolved trigger. That's actually one of mine. And so when I feel unsafe, I have a certain way of dealing with that emotion or that situation. And it is not a positive thing. It keeps me kind of imprisoned in a way because I've not resolved exactly the smaller parts of this unsafe. And one of the things that happened, which is a very minor thing, and I mentioned this in the part 1, but I'll mention it again, is when I was, I think, 5-ish, at the airport picking somebody up. I was with my dad, and I was holding his hand and somehow got disconnected from him, and then ended up grabbing a hand who I thought was my father, and it wasn't my father. And that caused trauma, unsafe feeling for me. And I've had, several of those types of unsafe, but then I've also had more major unsafe. So unsafe is a trauma that I've had, and I have to be able to notice it and notice the triggers so that it doesn't stay in my system as something unresolved. And it can be, for some people, a major, major factor in how their life is happening, their ways of maybe getting involved in drugs, and their life going down the tubes because they had whatever it was that happened to them. And it's not like you forget it. There are traumas that we forget, for sure. You hear it all the time, particularly a lot of times with women who will, not remember that they were molested until maybe they're 30 years old. So that's called a buried trauma. It's blocked, right? I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about traumas that you've had, and but you don't know that they're unresolved. You just kind of keep them stuck in a way, as energy in the body, but they're actually very active in the way that you are either getting triggered or you lead your lives. Just to give a kind of minor way that this can happen, and I'll use myself as an example, is I would notice that when I would see any type of mistreatment to another person. Now, it could be verbal. In fact, often that triggers me. So somebody that's verbally mistreating or not respecting someone, and could be a neighbor to neighbor. I mean, it can happen in all kinds of ways. It's happened for me in many different ways. And it really, I find that what happens and what alerts me is my energy just plummets, because that's triggering the way that I felt when I would see an individual that's, let's say, being bullied. How that individual that is the victim, the facial expressions, the body language, a victim type body language, a shame looking expression on their face, that for me triggers this plummeting of energy. And then when I kind of go within and investigate, where did this happen? This would be when my mother was pretty much consistently harassing me and emotionally abusing me through my entire childhood on up until my late teens, until I moved out. So that's another example. And what made me aware of it is I finally became aware of my energy when I'd see something like this just drop. Like I could be feeling fine, and all of a sudden my energy would drop. And so I would realize, okay, I'm still not resolved with this. And maybe we never totally get to a place where we aren't somewhat triggered, but once we understand what's happening, then we have the opportunity to deal with it in a healthy and effective way. So the first thing I recommend is that, one, you go within. This is where it begins. So every time that you notice that you're reacting in some particular way to something outside of yourself, whether it be somebody says something to you, or you've got road rage, or you've got something going on that is not a positive, or it could be something where you feel extremely vulnerable and unsafe type thing. In other words, everybody's got their own set of traumas, and some you are definitely familiar with, I'm sure, and some are resolved, and then there's those that aren't resolved. And the ones that are not resolved are typically the ones that are having a very negative impact on our daily life. It really impacts us when we're trying to navigate through certain challenges in a lifetime, or through certain situations that show up, and we don't realize, because we're focused on the situation, we think that's the issue. We don't realize that this is being triggered, and so it keeps us kind of blind to the fact that this trauma, be it a number one, which is a one-time thing, or or just not a big deal, to somewhere between 5 and 10, which are more heavy duty type traumas that one has had. And it's all for that person. It's not like, well, what are number 10 traumas? No. It depends on the individual. What could be a number 1 for me could be a number 10 for you, and vice versa. So it isn't even so easily defined as well. Everybody that had this trauma, they'd be a number 10 or a 5 or a 7. It's not how it works. It's the individual. So the key first is to become aware of a pattern that you have. A pattern that kind of shows up under certain circumstances. And it's the same pattern, but the circumstances change. So that could be confusing. Like, it's not just always the same circumstance, but something similar. And in some ways, it could look not even close, but, it's causing a certain reaction from you. And that's the clue. There it is. Certain reaction could feel to you like it's, across the board, like they're so far apart, these particular things that could happen, and yet you react in a particular way. So it can seem complex and complicated, but here's the deal. Once you really decide to investigate, you really decide that you definitely want to learn more about yourself, you want to see where this is happening or how this is happening, then the universe kind of shows up to help you. Because once you have your intention there, then you're open-minded and you're more able to identify these different situations. So I know it can sound like I'm talking vague, but I'm not. I'm talking, well, maybe I am. I don't know. I'm not intending to. But to give too many examples, which I don't even have, quite honestly, would then give somebody the idea of, what a trauma is and if it's worth investigating or if it's unresolved and, if it happened this way or that way. And I want to emphasize again, each of us have our own reaction from a certain something that happened most likely through our childhood. And that is where the ranking goes between 1 and 10, 1 being not so severe and 10 being severe. But it's not like certain traumas rank. It's us, the individual, of how one of us can be feel like we had a number 10 trauma and the other person had the same trauma and it was like a number 1, no biggie. Well, traumas are biggies if they're resolved, or if they're unresolved, excuse me. So that's what we're looking at today. And if this resonates with you, then you definitely want to do some investigation with it. If you notice particularly a pattern in your life that really has become an issue for you, maybe it's something like you can't keep a job longer than a couple years, and then something happens and you get fired, or you can't be in a relationship for more than a year or 2 or 6 months, or something always shows up in a relationship, a pattern that you have that changes the relationship or ends the relationship. It's everything about just our daily lives in a way that could be contributing in a negative way, and that means the trauma itself has not been resolved. That's what we're talking about. Whatever trauma it is that shows up for us, we need to really identify it, be aware of it, have compassion for ourselves for having this trauma, and begin to see a pattern of where we're reacting as if this trauma is still happening today, meaning the reaction to it. So most likely, it's not like a certain trauma happened and, okay, every time the same thing happens outside of myself, I get triggered. That could happen. But most of the time, it's just something is similar to the way that we reacted, our emotional reaction to a trauma, whether it be anger, being a victim, a martyr, angry, of course. Maybe I said that already. So it's it's our reaction. And the same pattern happens, but not in the same circumstance. So the circumstance can be all over the place. And that's what we want to look at. And when we say unresolved, it's because we're not seeing this pattern as causing us to have a certain reaction that's causing us issues in our life. And we don't even notice it in a way. We don't even notice that this happens as a pattern. We're unconscious, completely unconscious to it. And when it's unresolved, it's usually something that we don't want to deal with in a way, or we've just kind of put aside and thought, oh well, no biggie, it's all right. Or it could be a very serious trauma, but we think we remember it, so it's not like we can't remember it happened or buried it. So we know it happened, but we're just staying totally unaware of our reactions. We can even do things to distract ourselves from that. We could even think that we're, not that we're aware of it and we're doing everything to not have it happen, type thing, or to be aware of when we react in a certain way. Here's an idea I will share because I think it kind of shows how something maybe doesn't make complete sense. With my mother's emotional abuse with me, and other members of the family as well would chime in, I had this, I don't know, instinct, I guess, or I don't know why I responded to, I'm not who they say I am, even though I heard it and I felt it, that I was stupid, that I didn't understand things, that I didn't look right. I was just never right enough. I was never perfect enough. And yet there was something deep inside of me that kept saying, I'm not who they say I am. And as I moved into adulthood, I had this, I'm going to call it unconscious, but it was not completely unconscious. It was a driving force for me to prove to myself that I wasn't who they said I was. And that moved then into being a workaholic, to being an overachiever, to a driving force that is hard to even explain. To the outside world, it looked like, wow, look at her. She really works so hard, and she succeeds, and she kind of does this or that. And part of that was due to I would follow my intuition in terms of what to do for career. However, that driving force that forced me in a way, and the pattern was to prove to myself that I wasn't all the things that they said I was, which was never, positive. So there's just somewhat of an example of maybe something that could resonate with you or help you understand what I'm talking about. It's a hard subject, like so many subjects are. In fact, the whole thing that we try to talk about is we're going through this human experience. We're spirits going through this human experience. It's really hard to speak about it in a way that's understandable and very clear to a lot of us, but we can resonate sometimes with what it is we hear. We're going, I kind of get it. The bottom line is that we're doing an investigation of our inner world. It's up to us. Nobody can do it for us. We have to be the one doing it. We have to have the intention to investigate these patterns or what it is that's causing me to have this particular thing keep happening in my life, without blame, by the way. If you catch yourself blaming someone else or the situation, then that's a clue. That's a real clue that you're avoiding the trauma. And so that keeps you in avoidance, right? And that keeps you in distraction. So you got to look at when you're frustrated or not feeling so great about something, or the same thing kind of happens, or you keep getting all the, you in a job, you always get the boss that's a bully or that's, never appreciative of what you do, when you see that kind of pattern, then that's a clue for you that you keep recreating something from a unresolved pattern. So I don't know what else I can say at this time about this. When I made the first video, I said this is more of a subject than can happen in one video, and it's probably more than that can happen in two, but I'm going to leave it at two because it's one of those things that let's see where this goes. I'd love for some of you to comment, because that could start a thread or start some ways to additionally help one another see this from different points of view. That can help a lot. So please, if you're at all feel that you can share something, I'd love for you to leave a comment below, and let's see how that could go. If you like the video, please click like, and also I hope you'll subscribe to my channel as well. And then I'll just mention again that if you'd like to have some conversation with me about your particular challenges that you've had, or things that you could share that could help the rest of us, then I'd love to have first a conversation with you about what I'm thinking, etc. And then we'd go ahead and set a time to speak on Zoom and record that, and then I would put this on the channel. And again, it would just be everyday people, stuff that you've learned, lessons you've learned, or maybe something that you're just plain challenged with right now, and we kind of have a discussion and see if people would chime in through comments, etc. Or maybe another person would like to have a conversation as well. So I don't know where this is going to go. We'll just see. If it's meant to be, it'll happen. If it's not, then it won't. So I kind of believe if this is supposed to happen, then it'll attract the people that would like to be involved in that way. So I think that's it for today. I always say be kind to yourself. That's the other thing we really need to be working on as we're moving through this process, is the kindness, to be kind first to ourselves, to have compassion for ourselves. And as I'm talking about trauma, that really requires that we have compassion for ourselves, because oftentimes in a trauma, we blame ourselves, or we're feeling like we did something wrong, we're beating ourselves up, whatever. No, any trauma, it deserves to have compassion from you, from us, for whatever it is that we went through. So there's another reason to work on kindness and compassion. However, in the meantime, do take care, and we'll see you soon. I'm going to click off. If you watched a video at all, I have this little clicker that I use to click off the channel, or click off my recorder. And all the time I have to do 2 clicks when I click off, which doesn't make sense. Sometimes 3 clicks. I think it's just something in my mind that's stopping this, but let's see what happened. I'm going to give it a click, and we'll see if it'll turn off in 1 click. Take care. See you next time.